Anthony Richardson 1 to the Panthers. That puts Stroud number 2 to the Texans. And then the Colts trade up from 4 to 3 to get Bryce Young.
The big news, by the way, the big news today with Stroud was his S2 score. A bunch of them were leaked to Bob McGinn. Stroud, 18th percentile is his number.
Look, we just had Brandon
Correct.
from S2 on the show.
Did you?
A couple weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Oh, wow.
We broke it all down. If you're seeing this overall, go listen to the interview.
Now,
first of
he
all.
made
But
a point.
The percentage. Go ahead.
So number one, he made a point of saying there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. Some scores of people saying this guy was there, this guy was there, that are not even in the ballpark of being true, right? So this series of leaked numbers, any one of them could be bullshit, or all of them could be bullshit. Who knows? He also made the point of, look, this is not 18th percentile relative to us idiots. Like, this is 18th percentile of NFL prospects. So it's at least like, let's raise the bar a little bit from the guy's not a walking moron, like, or a guy that, like, you know, the ball flies his direction. It takes him 3 seconds to register. It's even in the air. This is not what we're talking about here. It is 18th percentile relative to NFL prospects.
Have you guys taken those tests at all?
No.
They are. I took one, and I do think it's interesting because a lot of the ones that like maybe apply to quarterbacks, I can see it. It's like you have to track dots on a screen.
Yeah.
And then once you get to 4 and 5 dots, which is like 4 and 5 wide receivers or 4 and 5 linebackers or whatever, like defenders that you have to keep track of, some people just like, I just felt myself lose it. But you just like none of the dots. Like and you feel that in sports sometimes too, when you're just like, maybe not baseball, but maybe like basketball, where it just moved too fast.
I felt
that. And you kind of like, you get that panicky.
Right. That's the thing. That's the word, the panicky. It's the quantifying that thing. I think that's always been a huge part of sports, where there are some people that always have time because they can do that. They can, when it's all gets in their brain, it doesn't overwhelm them, and they can still act like it's just one thing they're tracking and everything's fine. And they can always adjust to whatever's happening without seeming panicked. And then you have other people, and I was in this category, where when it starts to overwhelm you, you panic and you can only do like plan A. Plan B, no, dead. So that I think it is starting to quantify that thing, which has always just been an intangible.
Yeah.
Well, this guy's good under pressure, but that's what it is. That's why.
I want to know what Zach Wilson's S2 score is. Then I'll make a judgment.
There's a quote from an executive that says Stroud scored an 18. That is like red alert, red alert. You can't take a guy like that. That's why I have Stroud as a bust. That in conjunction with the fact to name one Ohio State quarterback that's ever done it in the league. I just think it's hilarious because the NFL has so much data, right? And it's all about the film, and you grind the film, and you spend hundreds and thousands of hours evaluating those guys. And they think as binary as we think sometimes. Bad score, bad. Good score, good. Right? I mean, like, I used to make fun of baseball scouts all the time. Like, this guy's got a good arm. He throws 95. I'm like, yes, my 4-year-old can look at 95 and say that's a good fastball. But that's what they lean on at the end. Score says 18, bad. Forget about, throw everything out the window.
I mean, how much of that is just like cutting corners and trying to make the process easier? Like, I don't know. I think that
I think a lot of it is also, though, like, just articulate, like, because, you know, he's being asked, what do you think about this? So he's like, 18, that's bad, can't have it. Like, you're not going to...
And then he says he's a bust. Also, no Ohio State quarterback's ever made it.
That part is dumb.
Yeah, those are overly simplistic things when we know that teams are in a draft room and CJ Stroud comes up and scouts have... And you sit there for hours talking about one player, breaking down all the good and the bad. It's never oversimplified like the way it is.
The take I have on that too, and this, I don't even know how like related this is necessarily, but I do think some of that binary thinking can come from ownership. And when ownership gets involved, and it's like, well, I sat down with him and shook his hand. I think this guy's fucking got it. And like that to me can, like, imagine if Chris comes down and he's like, hey, I think we should change the name to PFF NFL show or to podcast, or say we should call it just NFL Lose the PFF. You're not going to push back that hard, man. He's the owner, dude. You're just going to be like, yeah, I kind of like it too. That's how it's going to kind of go. Like, I think that when you're like a new head coach or a new GM, and the owner comes down, he's like, hey, I kind of like Bryce over CJ Stroud. It's like, me too. I can get on board with that. Not my fucking call. You write the checks.
But I think, like, there's certain things where there are like red flags in the sentence. Like, as soon as the guy says, oh, no Ohio State quarterback's ever done it, you're like, okay, immediately I'm no longer listening to anything you're saying because this is absurd. Like, that is a dumb take. And if you're connecting that to other things, like, I just no longer value your opinion. That was sufficiently stupid that I'm out on whatever you're saying. But I think there's a world where, like, if you're being asked about a random guy, right, you're not going to give the guy, like, obviously your thoughts on him are going to be layered, nuanced, and it's going to take a while. But, like, if somebody says, hey, what's your take on CJ Stroud? You're going to give, like, the first thing of scares me because of this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And obviously you have more to your thoughts than that, but that's the thing that you're going to use to sort of get the point across
sure.
in 5 seconds.
And the point on the test that Brandon kept making is just like a PFF grade, just like we would never say, this guy had a 92, therefore he's great. This guy had a 70, therefore don't draft him. He said the same thing. If you have a good test or a bad test, it's about the how, the what specifically, and it might just be certain parts of the test lead to certain levels of performance where you just, avoid certain plays, avoid certain concepts or whatever it is. There's nuance to all of this. It's never just this number.
But the big concern with Stroud would be, again, if this is true, right? If he is in the 18th percentile of this S2 test, it also does tally with he was bad under pressure last year outside of the Georgia game. Like, you connect those two things, and all of a sudden, now you've got a pattern starting to emerge. And that is enough to potentially scare you away from
So we're out on Stroud.
Well, he's a bust. Have you ever seen an Ohio State quarterback ever have success?
Never.
I'm not even sure it's like just pressure. It's just like out of rhythm with CJ Stroud. When it's kind of, rhythm's great. Like, he's elite in rhythm. But it's just kind of, you have to be a little more creative or a little more, again, like things breaking down. You have to track a little bit more than what was just handed to you from the snap.
And some of that is that offense again, which is
yeah.
like the entire approach to that offense over the last couple of quarterbacks has been drop back, stare down the target, wait till he's open, hit him. And they do that a ton, and they're really good at it. But you need more than that.
My concern with Stroud is I think he ends up the Derek Carr discourse, the Kirk Cousins discourse. I think Jared Goff, I think he just ends up in this category where he'll have, if everything is pristine around him, I think he's accurate and he'll deliver and he could be really good. If things are bad, though, fan base is going to be like, oh, this guy can't carry us. But that's to me, that's okay on a first contract, right? On a first contract, Jared Goff level of play
I think it
could
also
be-
depends
could work.
on the roster that you have at the time,
Yeah.
right? If you have a roster that's in place, like the Lions or something, where you think you can win with that rookie contract, then it makes more sense. But if you're a team like the Houston Texans or obviously the Carolina Panthers, where you don't feel like that roster is there yet, that's where I think you swing a big bat on Anthony Richardson. It's like, hey, I got to compete with Mahomes. And if I hit on this and it does reach that range of outcomes that is Mahomes level talent, elite level talent, the athleticism, the Fields level runs, that works for me, and the roster can figure it out later. Now, if you're further along in your roster development and you've hit on some picks and the cap situation's fine, then I think not settling, but opting for a rookie contract Stroud or a rookie contract whoever, I think that does make more sense.
I will say, or I'm just curious, because I think Baker Mayfield has a lot of the same concerns that like Stroud might have. I would wonder what Baker Mayfield's S2 score is actually.
Yeah.
Because he's very much one where at Oklahoma, when he was confident, when it just like didn't have to be anything outside of the easy layups that he was hitting, it was just money.
I'll pass along the anecdotal stuff that I've heard because there's other tests besides S2. There's personality tests. There's all these other psychological types of tests, like all these other things. And supposedly on certain tests, there were concerns for Baker Mayfield, right? The things that we never saw. We saw the on-field
Breathalyzer?
stuff. There was, concerns for Baker Mayfield, but then a guy like Josh Allen, they were like, yeah, this guy, he's going to get, because they're trying to figure out who's going to get better, right? Who's going to become, how did Mahomes and Brady and Breeze and Rodgers, they all had obstacles to overcome, whatever that was, draft position or arm or height, and they all overcame obstacles, whatever it may have been. That's the guy you really want.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to predict that. So there may have been tests out there that predicted, hey, look, Josh Allen, personality-wise or whatever, could be one of those guys who does it. Baker Mayfield might not be. So the NFL's trying. They're privy to these things that we're not.
When I was at the Combine this year, I was working on a piece talking through with GMs, coaches, scouts, the whole threshold things. Like, does he have to have 30-inch arms? Does he have to have, 280 pounds to play this position or whatever? And what the conversation continued to go to is like, we don't really think of, Martin Mayhew of the Commanders and these different GMs, the Bengals GM, Duke Tobin. Everyone kept going back to, we don't have these thresholds for that, but like, I want a guy that can get better and wants to get better. And everyone, sometimes that gets thrown in. Mike does it all the time. That gets thrown into like, oh, that's like kind of coach speak, GM speak, or whatever. Where you're like, I want a guy that wants it. But I do think that's what they actually care about, and that's why with Will Levis, I am thinking that these teams are going to be like in love with this guy because they think he has that. And I do think he's like a super tough player. And I talked to Liam Cohen, the offense coordinator that was there before Rich Gangarello took over, and like, everyone raves about like this guy wants to get better, striving. And I think the NFL covets that enough, and that's why Levis is getting pushed into the top 10, even having the year that he had.
It's definitely a thing. Like, remember the one negative that anybody had about Trevor Lawrence was like, does he really love it enough? He's got options. That guy could be something else. Yeah. He could do a career other than football and be fine. That was like, I don't know. Like, compare that to some of these other quarterbacks that need this game. Like, it's definitely a thing that the NFL still focuses on.
And they should want that. I mean, you only get 7 picks. Sometimes 10, sometimes 5. But you only get a handful of picks. You should want the right guys and all that. So I get it. But then sometimes it's like you hear the same stories about Davis Webb. Like, oh, that dude, he just wants it. He's in the film room 19 hours a day and all that stuff. It's like, all right, it doesn't matter. He can't, throw the ball accurately. So,
like Jake Locker coming out. I remember the Gruden. I saw the clip of him getting drafted. Gruden's like, this guy's going to go to war. And he retires 4 years into his career. Like he didn't go to war at all. The dude left the battlefield.
Good luck.
I do think it's something that
Deserter.
scouts, GMs, coaches covet. I do think it's something hard to gauge. Right?
Yes,
It's hard to say like, oh no, that's for sure.
That's
a
why
warrior.
Josh McDaniels drafted Tim Tebow in the first round as his first pick. This is my quarterback. Tebow reminds me of Tom Brady because he wants it.
Particularly like when money arrives. I mean, it's a different, how
yeah.
much do you want the
variables.
money and how much do you want the football?
I was talking with a coach in the offseason talking about like a recent draft pick that was struggling, and I was like, oh, like how's this going? Like kind of off the record and stuff. And it's like, I just need to figure out what he wants. Like, what does this guy want in order to get better? And I feel like that happens a lot with these draft busts. And I've been one of those people who's like, teams fail players, not players. But I think when you get into the situation, how a player can fail himself is if you don't fucking want it and like you don't show up and you don't do these different things.